I thought the hardest part of losing Harold would be the loneliness. Sitting across from my son Derek and his wife Sienna at Murphy's Steakhouse, watching them slide legal documents across the white tablecloth with satisfied smirks, I realized I was wrong. The hardest part was discovering that the child I raised had grown into a predator. As Derek tapped his manicured finger on the signature line, explaining how I was too grief-stricken and confused to manage alone, I reached into my leather purse and pulled out my own folded document. Before I sign anything, I said with the calmest smile I could manage, "There's something you both should know about your father's will." 3 weeks earlier, I stood in the kitchen of our modest 3-bedroom ranch house in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, staring at the coffee mug Harold would never use again. The paramedics had taken him away that morning after his massive heart attack, and the silence felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. 42 years of marriage ended in the time it took me to dial 911 and watch his gentle brown eyes close for the final time. Harold had been the steady one in our relationship, methodical and quiet. While I taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary for 35 years, he worked as a senior accountant for Midwest Agricultural Solutions, coming home each evening with grass stains on his khaki pants and soil samples in his shirt pocket. We lived simply saved carefully, and I assumed we'd retire with enough to cover our basic needs and maybe a small vacation each summer. The funeral was a blur of casseroles and condolences. Derek arrived from Des Moines with Sienna, both dressed in expensive black outfits that seemed more appropriate for a cocktail party than a memorial service. I noticed how Derek's eyes kept scanning our living room, taking inventory of the worn furniture and dated wallpaper. When Mrs. Henderson from next door mentioned our cozy little home, Sienna exchanged a meaningful glance with Derek that made my stomach twist. 2 days after we laid Harold to rest at Graceland Cemetery, I sat in the oak-paneled office of Harold's attorney, Mr. Benjamin Steinberg. I expected this meeting to be brief and straightforward. Harold had always handled our finances, keeping me informed about the basics, but managing the details himself. I figured I'd inherit our house worth maybe $200,000, plus Harold's modest pension and whatever remained in our savings account. Mr. Steinberg, a distinguished man in his 70s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, opened a thick manila folder and cleared his throat. "Allegra, I need to prepare you for something that might come as quite a shock." Harold was far more financially astute than most people realized. I shifted in the leather chair, confused. "I don't understand. He was an accountant, sure, but we lived pretty simply." Harold began investing in agricultural futures and farmland acquisitions 28 years ago. Mr. Steinberg explained, pulling out document after document. He had an extraordinary gift for predicting crop yields and land values. Over the decades, he built quite a portfolio. The numbers he read aloud seemed impossible. Harold had accumulated $22 million in various investment accounts, plus a $3 million lakefront estate in Brainerd, Minnesota, and a $4 million producing vineyard in Sonoma County, California. The total estate value was $29 million. I sat there speechless, my hands trembling, as Mr. Steinberg showed me photographs of properties I'd never seen before. The Minnesota Lake House was a sprawling cedar and stone structure with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking pristine water. The California vineyard stretched across rolling hills dotted with neat rows of grapevines and included a charming Mediterranean-style villa. "Why didn't he tell me?" I whispered. "Harold was very private about money," Mr. Steinberg said gently. "He believed in providing security without creating worry. He also mentioned concerns about certain family members and their attitudes toward wealth." That comment sent a chill through me. As I drove home through the familiar streets of Cedar Rapids past the Dairy Queen, where Harold and I used to take Derek for ice cream, I thought about my son's behavior since the funeral. The way he'd measured rooms with his eyes, asked pointed questions about insurance policies, and made comments about me being all alone in this big house now. That evening, as I sat at the kitchen table looking through Harold's will, Derek and Sienna arrived unannounced. Derek hugged me with what felt like calculated warmth, while Sienna carried a plate of store-bought cookies arranged to look homemade. "Mom, Sienna and I have been talking," Derek said, settling into Harold's chair without asking. "We're worried about you rattling around in this house by yourself. We brought someone who might be able to help." Before I could respond, a woman in a navy blazer stepped through the front door. Derek introduced her as Linda Morrison, a local realtor who specialized in helping seniors transition to more manageable living situations. Linda walked through our home with practiced efficiency, commenting on the good bones of the structure and the desirable neighborhood location. She took photos of every room while Derek nodded approvingly and Sienna made notes on her phone. "The market is excellent right now," Linda announced when she finished her tour. "I could probably get you $350, maybe $400,000 if we stage it properly. That would give you a nice nest egg for a senior living community." I felt my face flush with anger and something else I couldn't quite identify. They'd planned this entire scenario without consulting me. Derek had already decided my future assumed I'd be grateful for his intervention and brought a stranger into my home to appraise my life. "I haven't decided anything about selling," I said quietly. Derek's smile tightened. "Mom, be realistic. You can't maintain this place alone. The yard work, the repairs, the utilities. It's too much responsibility for someone your age." As they left that night with Linda promising to send me some numbers to think about, I realized Harold's concerns about certain family members had been well-founded. Derek wasn't offering help. He was positioning himself to control my future, and he had no idea what he was really trying to steal. Over the next week, Derek launched what I can only describe as a campaign to undermine my confidence and independence. He called every morning with articles he'd found online about elderly people falling victim to scams, home invasion robberies targeting seniors, and the dangers of living alone after a spouse's death. "Mom, I read about this woman in Des Moines who forgot to lock her door and had everything stolen," he'd say, his voice dripping with manufactured concern. "These criminals target widows because they know you're vulnerable right now." He brought me a thick folder of brochures for senior living communities, each one featuring smiling elderly people playing chess and tending small gardens. The cheapest option was $4,000 per month, which would have consumed most of what Derek believed to be my entire inheritance within a few years. Sienna played her role perfectly, arriving each afternoon with casseroles and offers to help organize Harold's paperwork. She'd sit at my kitchen table sorting through mail and making sympathetic noises about the complexity of managing finances alone. "Allegra, honey, you shouldn't have to deal with all these bills and statements," she'd coo, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her coffee cup. "Derek is so good with money. Maybe you should let him take over some of these responsibilities." What really unsettled me was how she'd linger near Harold's desk in the den, opening drawers and rifling through folders with practiced casualness. When I walked in on her photographing bank statements with her phone, she claimed she was just trying to understand your monthly expenses to help with budgeting. The psychological pressure was relentless. Derek brought me a book called Protecting Yourself from Financial Predators and highlighted sections about cognitive decline in elderly adults. He scheduled an appointment with our family doctor, Dr. Martinez, claiming I'd seemed forgetful and disoriented during recent conversations. "I think Dad's death might have affected her more than she's admitting," Derek told Dr. Martinez while I sat right there in the examination room. "She's been leaving bills unopened, forgetting appointments, asking the same questions repeatedly." None of this was true, But Derek delivered these lies with such sincere concern that I could see Dr. Martinez beginning to believe him. When the doctor asked if I felt overwhelmed by financial responsibilities, Derek jumped in before I could answer. "She tried to pay the electric bill 3 times last month," he said. "I had to call the company to sort it out." This was completely fabricated, but it sounded plausible enough to make Dr. Martinez recommend family assistance with financial management during your grief period. I began to understand that Derek wasn't just planning to help himself to what he thought was a modest inheritance. He was systematically building a case to have me declared incompetent so he could control everything I owned. My suspicions were confirmed when I talked to my sister Janet in Phoenix. She called in tears, worried sick about my mental state. "Derek called and said you're showing signs of dementia," Janet sobbed. "He said you've been forgetting to eat, leaving the stove on, getting confused about dates. Allegra, why didn't you tell me you were struggling?" I assured Janet that Derek was lying, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. My own son's word carried more weight than mine, especially when he painted himself as a concerned caregiver dealing with a deteriorating mother. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor of 15 years, mentioned that Derek had stopped by to ask about my mental state. He'd told her I'd been wandering around the yard in my nightgown at 3 in the morning and seemed disoriented when she tried to talk to me. Another complete fabrication, but Mrs. Patterson looked at me with new concern during our conversation over the fence. Even Jim Murphy, our postal carrier for the past decade, seemed suspicious when Derek requested access to my mail. Derek claimed I'd been missing important bills and asked Jim to give him anything that looked official or financial. The scope of Derek's manipulation became clear when I started investigating his own situation. I spent an afternoon at the Cedar Rapids Public Library using their computers to research public records about Derek's construction business and personal finances. What I discovered made my blood run cold. Derek's company, Riverside Custom Homes, was hemorrhaging money. He'd taken deposits for 3 houses that were never completed, resulting in multiple lawsuits. His business account had been overdrawn for 6 months, and creditors were circling. Derek and Sienna's personal finances were even worse. Their McMansion in West Des Moines, which they'd purchased for $650,000 now, had 2 mortgages totaling over $700,000. They'd refinanced twice and taken out a home equity loan to pay credit card debts. I found records of 7 maxed-out credit cards totaling over $90,000 in high-interest debt. Derek's truck had been repossessed twice, and they were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments. They were facing bankruptcy within months, unless they found a significant source of income. Suddenly, Derek's newfound interest in my welfare made perfect sense. He wasn't trying to help an aging mother transition to appropriate housing. He was plotting to steal what he believed was my modest inheritance to save himself from financial ruin. But the most shocking discovery came when I found Derek's notebook. He'd left his coat in my front closet during one of his visits, and when I went to hang it properly, a small spiral notebook fell from the pocket. My hands shook as I read Derek's meticulous planning. Timeline for Mom's transition. Get her declared incompetent by Christmas. File for guardianship by New Year. Sell house immediately. Estimated value $400,000. After realtor fees and legal costs, approximately $300,000 net. Move Mom to Sunset Manor. Monthly cost $3,800 gives us time to liquidate other assets. Total inheritance estimated at $300,000 to $350,000 after expenses. He'd written potential objections and responses. If Mom resists, emphasize safety concerns and recent confusion. If family objects, provide documentation of mental decline. If legal challenges, use doctor's recommendation for assisted living. The final entry made me physically ill. Sienna researching power of attorney requirements. Need medical documentation of incompetence. Dr. Coleman, recommended by S's family, specializes in geriatric assessments. Derek had planned every detail of my future without my consent, based on the assumption that I was weak, confused, and easily manipulated. He'd already chosen where I'd live, calculated how much money he'd steal, and identified professionals who would rubber stamp his scheme. As I sat in my kitchen that night holding Derek's notebook and thinking about Harold's hidden fortune, I realized my son had underestimated me in ways that would prove to be his downfall. The next morning, I made a decision that would have shocked Derek if he'd understood what I was doing. Instead of confronting him about the notebook, I began giving him exactly what he expected to see: a confused, declining widow who needed his protection. When Derek called to check on me, I let confusion creep into my voice. "Oh, Derek, honey, I'm so glad you called. I couldn't remember if I paid the gas bill this month. There are so many papers on Harold's desk, and I just feel so overwhelmed." I could practically hear Derek's satisfaction through the phone. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll come over this afternoon and help you organize everything. You don't need to handle this alone." But while I was performing helplessness for Derek's benefit, I was secretly building the strongest legal case I'd ever constructed. My first stop was a private meeting with Mr. Steinberg to discuss protecting Harold's actual assets. "Allegra, what you're describing constitutes elder abuse and fraud," Mr. Steinberg said grimly after I explained Derek's scheme. "We need to document everything while ensuring your real inheritance remains protected." We spent 3 hours restructuring Harold's estate to make it virtually theft-proof. The majority of assets were moved into irrevocable trusts with specific anti-fraud provisions. The lakefront property and vineyard were transferred to a family LLC with me as the sole managing member. Even if Derek somehow gained temporary guardianship, he wouldn't be able to touch the real money. Mr. Steinberg also recommended I work with Dr. Patricia Hayes, an estate planning attorney who specialized in protecting elderly clients from family exploitation. Dr. Hayes was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd seen every variation of this scheme. "The key is documentation," Dr. Hayes explained during our confidential meeting at her office. "We need recorded evidence of Derek's manipulation attempts and medical proof that you're mentally competent." She provided me with a small digital recording device no bigger than a USB drive and taught me how to use it discreetly. Record every conversation with Derek and Sienna. Don't tell them you're doing it, but make sure you capture their actual words and intentions. Meanwhile, I continued my performance at home. I left bills scattered across Harold's desk, complained about being forgetful, and asked Derek to explain things I understood perfectly well. Each confused question I asked made Derek more confident in his scheme. "Mom, maybe you should let me handle the checkbook for a while," Derek suggested during one visit. "You seem so stressed about money right now." "Oh, would you? That would be such a relief," I replied, while secretly recording his obvious eagerness to control my finances. I also began working with Thomas Wright, the manager at First National Bank, where Harold and I had maintained accounts for 20 years. Thomas was a trustworthy man in his 40s who'd known Harold professionally and was horrified when I explained Derek's plans. "Mrs. Hartwell, I want you to know that Derek has been calling here trying to get information about your accounts," Thomas revealed. "He claimed you'd asked him to help manage your finances, but something felt wrong about his approach. Thomas helped me set up additional safeguards on all accounts and agreed to alert me immediately if Derek attempted any unauthorized access. He also provided documentation showing that I was mentally competent and capable of managing complex financial decisions. To build my medical defense, I arranged for comprehensive cognitive testing with Dr. Sarah Chen, a neuropsychologist who specialized in geriatric assessments. Dr. Chen's evaluation confirmed what I already knew: my mental faculties were completely intact, with above-average scores in memory reasoning and problem-solving. "Mrs. Hartwell, you show no signs of cognitive impairment whatsoever," Dr. Chen concluded. "Your test results are consistent with someone 30 years younger. If anyone is questioning your mental competence, they're either misinformed or acting with ulterior motives." While building my legal defenses, I continued gathering evidence about Derek's deceptions. I discovered he'd been intercepting my mail by filing a change of address form, with the post office redirecting financial statements and bills to a post office box he controlled. Jim Murphy, our postal carrier, was reluctant to admit his role, but eventually confessed that Derek had convinced him I was becoming dangerously forgetful about important mail. "He said you'd been missing bill payment deadlines and might lose your utilities," Jim explained apologetically. "I thought I was helping you by letting him collect the financial stuff." Derek had also been calling my utility companies, claiming I was experiencing age-related confusion and needed assistance managing my accounts. He'd convinced the electric company to accept payments from him on my behalf, and had spoken to the gas company about setting up automatic payments from an account he controlled. The manipulation extended to my social circle. Derek had called my church Bethel Methodist, claiming I'd been missing services due to health issues and needed special attention from the congregation. He'd contacted my former colleagues at Lincoln Elementary, spreading the story that I was struggling with grief-related dementia. Everywhere I went in Cedar Rapids, people looked at me with pity and concern. Derek had systematically poisoned my reputation, creating a community-wide narrative that I was a confused, vulnerable widow who needed family intervention. But Derek's most audacious move was yet to come. During one of his visits, he mentioned that he'd arranged for me to meet with a specialist who could help assess your current needs and recommend appropriate support services. "Her name is Dr. Rachel Coleman," Derek explained. "She works with families going through difficult transitions. Sienna's family recommended her highly." I agreed to the meeting, knowing this was likely the medical professional Derek's notebook had mentioned. Dr. Coleman arrived the next week, a woman in her 60s with an overly cheerful demeanor and a briefcase full of assessment forms. The evaluation felt rigged from the moment it began. Dr. Coleman asked leading questions designed to highlight confusion and dependency. "Do you ever feel overwhelmed by financial responsibilities? Have you noticed any changes in your memory since your husband's death? Do you sometimes forget important appointments or tasks?" I answered carefully, performing just enough confusion to satisfy Derek's expectations while ensuring my responses wouldn't support a genuine incompetency ruling. I forgot minor details while demonstrating clear understanding of major concepts. I expressed appropriate grief while maintaining logical thinking patterns. Dr. Coleman seemed disappointed that I wasn't more obviously impaired. She pushed harder, asking me to perform mathematical calculations that were designed to be frustrating and confusing. When I completed them correctly, she claimed the results indicated significant stress affecting cognitive function. After Dr. Coleman left, Derek seemed pleased with how the evaluation had gone. "She's going to write up her recommendations," he told Sienna within my hearing range. "She thinks Mom would benefit from professional financial management and a more structured living environment." What Derek didn't know was that I'd recorded the entire session and had witnesses to Dr. Coleman's biased approach. Mrs. Patterson had been in my kitchen during the evaluation and was shocked by the leading questions and predetermined conclusions. "That woman wasn't trying to help you," Mrs. Patterson said afterward. "She was building a case against you from the moment she walked in." As Derek's scheme accelerated toward its conclusion, I felt strangely calm. I'd spent weeks watching my son plot to steal what he thought was everything I owned, destroy my reputation, and warehouse me in an institution for his financial convenience. Instead of breaking me, his betrayal had revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed. Harold had protected me with his hidden wealth, but I was protecting myself with careful planning, legal expertise, and the kind of strategic thinking Derek had inherited from his father, but failed to recognize in his mother. The dinner at Murphy's Steakhouse was approaching, and Derek had no idea that the confused, helpless widow he planned to manipulate had become the architect of his downfall. Dr. Coleman's formal assessment took place on a gray Thursday morning in late November. She arrived with an even larger briefcase and a digital tablet loaded with cognitive evaluation software. Derek and Sienna were present ostensibly to provide family context, but really to ensure the evaluation proceeded according to their agenda. Mrs. Hartwell, I'm going to conduct some standard tests to assess your current cognitive function, Dr. Coleman announced, setting up her materials on my kitchen table. These will help us determine what level of support might be beneficial for you. The tests were clearly designed to highlight any possible impairment. Dr. Coleman asked me to remember long lists of random words, solve complex mathematical problems under time pressure, and navigate deliberately confusing logical puzzles. When I performed well, she attributed my success to test anxiety masking underlying deficits. The most telling moment came when Dr. Coleman asked me about my financial assets. Can you tell me about your current income and expenses? Do you understand your financial situation since your husband's passing? I gave her the performance she expected, expressing confusion about Harold's paperwork and concern about managing money alone. Derek and Sienna exchanged satisfied glances as I painted myself as overwhelmed and financially naive. Numbers have never been my strong point, I said with deliberate uncertainty. Harold handled all of that. I just know we have the house and whatever he left in the bank. I hope it's enough to cover my expenses. Dr. Coleman made extensive notes about my financial anxiety and confusion regarding estate assets. She recommended immediate family assistance with financial management and consideration of simplified living arrangements to reduce cognitive burden. What Dr. Coleman didn't realize was that my small recording device was capturing every word of her biased evaluation. Her questions revealed advanced knowledge of Derek's desired conclusions, and her responses to my answers showed predetermined opinions rather than objective assessment. After Dr. Coleman left, Derek filed preliminary guardianship paperwork with the Lynn County court system. I discovered this through Thomas Wright at the bank, who'd been monitoring any legal actions involving my name. Mrs. Hartwell, Derek has submitted documents claiming you're unable to manage your financial affairs due to cognitive impairment, Thomas informed me during a discreet phone call. He's asking for temporary guardianship pending a formal competency hearing. The paperwork Derek submitted was a masterpiece of manipulation. He'd included falsified examples of unpaid bills he'd intercepted, and hidden testimonials from neighbors about my concerning behavior, based on rumors he'd planted and Dr. Coleman's assessment recommending family intervention. Derek had also provided bank statements showing missed payments and overdraft fees. What the court didn't know was that Derek himself had caused these problems by redirecting my mail and interfering with my normal payment processes. But my secret weapon was James Butler, the private investigator Dr. Hayes had recommended. James was a former police detective in his 50s who specialized in elder abuse cases and financial fraud investigations. Over the past 3 weeks, James had been documenting Derek and Sienna's activities with professional thoroughness. His surveillance revealed a level of premeditation that shocked even me. James discovered that Derek had been visiting estate sale companies getting appraisals for my furniture and personal belongings. He'd contacted 3 different realtors for comparative market analyses of my house and had researched the fastest possible sale timelines. Sienna had been even more calculating. James photographed her meeting with interior designers discussing how to update mom's house for immediate sale. She'd chosen paint colors, flooring options, and staging furniture from catalogs planning every detail of the property's makeover. "Mrs. Hartwell, they've essentially planned your entire liquidation," James reported during one of our clandestine meetings at a coffee shop across town. "Derek has spreadsheets showing projected income from selling your assets and estimated costs for your institutionalization." The most damaging evidence James uncovered was Derek's financial fraud. Derek had been making small withdrawals from my checking account using a forged power of attorney document. The amounts were carefully chosen to avoid triggering bank alerts: $200 here, $400 there, always with plausible explanations about helping with my expenses. James also discovered that Derek had opened a credit card in my name using my social security number and a fake signature that roughly matched my handwriting. He'd charged over $3,000 in cash advances, planning to claim the debt was evidence of my financial confusion. "This isn't just elder abuse," James concluded. "This is identity theft, forgery, and fraud on multiple levels. Derek has committed enough crimes to face serious prison time." While James gathered evidence, I continued playing my role as the confused widow. Derek's confidence had reached dangerous levels, and he'd begun making plans that revealed the full scope of his callousness. Derek had already submitted an application to Sunset Manor, the assisted living facility he'd chosen for me. The monthly cost was $4,200, which would consume most of what he believed to be my inheritance within 6 years. After that, Derek planned to move me to a state-funded nursing facility and use the remaining money for his own purposes. Sienna had been researching estate sale companies and had chosen Morrison Estate Services to liquidate my personal belongings. She'd provided them with a detailed inventory of my furniture, Harold's tools, my china collection, and even my jewelry. Everything I owned had been assigned a monetary value and scheduled for disposal. The cruelest detail was Derek's plan for Harold's grave marker. He'd contacted the cemetery about updating Harold's headstone to include my name and death date, with the date left blank to be filled in later. Derek was so confident in his scheme that he'd already prepared for my death, whether natural or induced by the stress of losing everything. But Derek's biggest mistake was trusting Dr. Coleman completely. During one of James's surveillance sessions, he recorded Derek and Sienna meeting with Dr. Coleman at a restaurant in Des Moines, celebrating the success of their conspiracy. "Rachel, you were perfect," Sienna gushed over cocktails. "The way you worded that assessment made it sound like Allegra can barely function on her own." Dr. Coleman laughed, accepting their praise. "I've been doing these evaluations for families like yours for 15 years. The key is making it sound medical and objective while giving you exactly what you need for the court." Derek raised his beer bottle in a toast. "To family looking out for family and professionals who understand how the real world works." James's hidden camera captured every word of their self-congratulatory celebration. Dr. Coleman had just confessed to falsifying medical evaluations for money, while Derek and Sienna had admitted to deliberately deceiving the courts about my mental capacity. As November drew to a close, Derek scheduled the formal dinner where he planned to present me with the guardianship papers and demand my signature. He chose Murphy's Steakhouse because it was upscale and public, a place where he could appear to be the caring son helping his confused mother make important decisions. Derek had arranged for 2 family friends to join us as witnesses: Robert Rodriguez, Harold's former co-worker, and Elizabeth Henderson, my longtime neighbor. Derek had convinced them both that I was experiencing serious cognitive decline and needed family intervention to protect me from financial predators. "Bob, you knew Dad for 20 years, Derek had told Robert during a carefully orchestrated phone call. You can see how confused Mom has become since he died. She needs people who care about her to step up and make sure she's safe. Elizabeth Henderson had been even easier to manipulate. Derek visited her regularly, expressing concern about my episodes of disorientation and asking her to keep an eye on me for signs of worsening confusion. "Libby, I'm so worried about leaving Mom alone in that house," Derek had confided. "She's been forgetting to eat, leaving doors unlocked, getting confused about what day it is. I think Dad's death might have triggered some kind of dementia." Neither Robert nor Elizabeth questioned Derek's claims. They'd known me as Harold's quiet wife and Derek's devoted mother, and it seemed natural that my son would be the one to recognize and address my declining capabilities. What Derek didn't know was that I'd already approached Detective Maria Santos of the Cedar Rapids Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Santos was a sharp woman in her 40s who'd investigated dozens of elder abuse cases and recognized Derek's scheme immediately. "Mrs. Hartwell, what your son is attempting constitutes multiple felonies," Detective Santos explained during our meeting at the police station. "We're talking about elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. With the evidence your private investigator has gathered, we can build a very strong case." Detective Santos agreed to be present at Murphy's Steakhouse, posing as a regular customer, while monitoring Derek's final attempt to complete his fraud. She'd be accompanied by Detective Ryan Walsh, a financial crimes specialist, who would witness Derek's presentation of the forged documents. "We want to catch them in the act of attempting to coerce your signature," Detective Santos explained. "Once Derek presents those guardianship papers and Dr. Coleman's falsified assessment, we'll have them for attempted fraud and conspiracy." As I prepared for the dinner at Murphy's Steakhouse, I felt a strange sense of anticipation rather than fear. Derek had spent months underestimating my intelligence, manipulating my reputation, and planning to steal what he thought was everything I owned. Tomorrow night, he would discover that the confused, helpless widow he'd been plotting against was actually the architect of his complete destruction. And he'd learn that the modest inheritance he was trying to steal was nothing compared to the fortune he'd never known existed. Harold's hidden millions would remain hidden from Derek forever, but his crimes against the woman who'd raised him would be exposed for everyone to see. Murphy's Steakhouse occupied a restored Victorian mansion on First Avenue, its burgundy leather booths and crystal chandeliers creating an atmosphere of understated elegance. Derek had chosen this restaurant carefully, knowing that its upscale ambiance would make him appear sophisticated and responsible, the kind of successful son any mother would trust with important decisions. I arrived precisely at 7 o'clock, wearing the navy blue dress Derek had suggested, because it made me look appropriately dignified for such an important evening. Derek and Sienna were already seated in a corner booth, with Robert Rodriguez and Elizabeth Henderson positioned across from them like a carefully arranged jury. Derek stood to greet me with an elaborate hug, his cologne overpowering as he guided me to the seat that placed my back to most of the restaurant. "Mom, you look wonderful. I'm so glad we could all get together for this important conversation." Sienna beamed at me with practiced warmth, her blonde hair perfectly styled and her jewelry catching the light from the chandelier above our table. "Allegra, we've ordered your favorite wine. I thought it might help you relax while we discuss some important matters." The first 20 minutes of dinner proceeded exactly as Derek had choreographed. Robert and Elizabeth made polite conversation about the weather and holiday plans, while Derek and Sienna played their roles as devoted family members concerned about my welfare. "Mom, Bob was just telling me how much he misses working with Dad," Derek said, cutting his prime rib with surgical precision. "It must be so comforting to know that Dad's friends are still looking out for you." Robert nodded earnestly. "Harold was one of the finest men I ever worked with, Allegra. He'd want to know that people are taking care of you now that he's gone." Elizabeth chimed in with similar sentiments about neighborhood safety and the challenges of maintaining a house alone. Both of them had been thoroughly convinced that I was a vulnerable widow who needed family protection from an increasingly dangerous world. As the main course concluded, Derek signaled the waiter to clear our table and bring coffee. Then he reached for the leather briefcase he'd positioned beside his chair, his expression shifting to one of serious responsibility. "Mom, I hope you've enjoyed dinner because Sienna and I need to discuss something very important with you." Derek began, his voice taking on the tone he'd used since childhood, when he wanted to sound mature and authoritative. He opened the briefcase and withdrew a thick manila folder, placing it on the white tablecloth, with ceremonial gravity. "Since Dad died, Sienna and I have been losing sleep worrying about your situation. Living alone in that big house, managing all those financial responsibilities by yourself, dealing with people who might try to take advantage of your generosity." Sienna reached across the table to pat my hand. "We love you too much to stand by and watch you struggle with burdens that are too heavy for anyone to carry alone." Derek opened the folder and began arranging documents like a lawyer presenting evidence to a jury. "We've consulted with professionals, talked to people who understand these situations, and researched the best options for your future security and happiness." The first document was Dr. Coleman's assessment, complete with official letterhead and medical terminology designed to sound authoritative. Derek read selected passages aloud, emphasizing phrases like significant cognitive stress and diminished capacity for complex financial decisions. Dr. Coleman is one of the most respected geriatric specialists in Iowa. Derek explained to Robert and Elizabeth, who listened with growing concern. "She's worked with hundreds of families facing similar transitions." Next came the guardianship papers, thick legal documents that Derek had prepared with meticulous attention to detail. He explained each section as if he were doing me a tremendous favor by assuming responsibility for my welfare. "This power of attorney arrangement will protect you from scammers and predators," Derek said, his finger tracing signature lines he'd marked with yellow highlighter. "It ensures that someone who loves you is making decisions about your money and your living situation." The property transfer documents came next, deeds that would transfer ownership of my house to Derek, for safekeeping and eventual sale to fund appropriate care. Derek presented this as a protective measure rather than theft, claiming the arrangement would shield your primary asset from potential creditors or legal challenges. Finally, Derek produced glossy brochures for Sunset Manor, the assisted living facility where he planned to warehouse me. He'd highlighted amenities like supervised activities, medication management, and 24-hour security as if these were luxuries rather than restrictions. Sunset Manor is one of the finest facilities in the region. Sienna added, her voice dripping with false enthusiasm. "You'll have your own apartment-prepared meals and access to healthcare professionals whenever you need them." Robert and Elizabeth exchanged glances, clearly moved by what appeared to be a loving family's careful planning for an aging mother's future. They had no idea they were witnessing the final stage of an elaborate theft disguised as compassion. Derek pushed the documents toward me with practiced confidence. "All you need to do is sign these papers, and Sienna and I will handle everything else. You'll never have to worry about bills, repairs, or financial decisions again." As Derek spoke, I noticed Detective Santos sitting at the bar nursing a glass of white wine while monitoring our conversation. Detective Walsh occupied a table near the window, appearing to read a newspaper while actually recording everything through a device hidden in his jacket pocket. I looked down at the documents Derek had arranged so carefully, my hands trembling with what he interpreted as nervous gratitude, but was actually barely controlled rage. For months, I'd watched my own son plot to destroy my independence, steal my assets, and institutionalize me for his financial convenience. Derek had forged signatures, manipulated medical evaluations, poisoned my reputation throughout Cedar Rapids, and convinced family friends that I was mentally incompetent. He'd committed multiple felonies while portraying himself as a devoted caregiver, protecting a confused elderly woman. But Derek's greatest mistake was assuming that the woman who'd raised him supported his education and sacrificed her own ambitions for his success was too weak and stupid to recognize his betrayal. I reached into my leather purse, feeling the weight of the document I'd prepared for this moment. Derek, before I sign anything, there's something you should know about your father's will. Derek's smile faltered slightly. What do you mean, Mom? We already know about Dad's will. The house, his pension, maybe a little savings account. I pulled out a folded copy of Harold's complete estate documentation, letting it rest on the table beside Derek's fraudulent papers. Your father left me considerably more than you realized. Sienna leaned forward, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the sudden tension in her features. How much more, Allegra? I opened Harold's will to the asset summary page, where $29 million in property and investments were listed in black and white. Harold accumulated quite a portfolio over the years. A lakefront estate in Minnesota, a producing vineyard in California, and approximately $22 million in various investment accounts. The silence at our table was deafening. Robert and Elizabeth stared at the documents with shock, while Derek's face cycled through disbelief, recognition, and finally desperate calculation. $29 million. I repeated, watching Derek's eyes dart between Harold's will and his own worthless guardianship papers. Which means, of course, that everything you've planned for the past 3 months has been based on a rather significant miscalculation. Derek's hand shot across the table toward Harold's will, but I pulled it back smoothly. I'm afraid there's more you need to know about your recent activities. I reached into my purse again and withdrew my phone, placing it on the table with the screen facing Derek and Sienna. I've been recording your conversations for weeks, including your celebration dinner with Dr. Coleman, where you all congratulated each other on successfully defrauding an elderly woman. Sienna's wine glass slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, white wine spreading across the linen tablecloth like spilled blood. Derek's face had gone completely pale, his mouth opening and closing without sound. I also have documentation of your identity theft, Derek. The credit cards you opened in my name, the forged power of attorney you used to access my bank accounts, the falsified medical reports Dr. Coleman created for money. Robert and Elizabeth were staring at Derek and Sienna with dawning horror, finally understanding that they hadn't been invited to witness a caring family decision, but to serve as unwitting accomplices to elder abuse and fraud. Derek found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. Mom, you don't understand. We were trying to protect you. The doctor said you needed help. Dr. Coleman is a fraud who's been falsifying evaluations for families like yours for 15 years, I replied calmly. She confessed to the whole scheme while you were buying her drinks. I played a brief audio clip from Derek and Dr. Coleman's celebratory dinner, their voices clear and unmistakable as they discussed manipulating medical assessments and deceiving courts. Derek's desperation exploded into anger. You recorded us! You sneaky old woman, you recorded private conversations. He lunged across the table, grabbing for my phone and the estate documents. Give me those papers, you're confused and manipulated. Someone's obviously taking advantage of you. Derek's violent outburst in the middle of Murphy's Steakhouse created exactly the public scene Detective Santos had been waiting for. As Derek struggled to snatch documents from my hands, while shouting about my supposed incompetence, every diner in the restaurant turned to stare at our table. Sir, I'm going to need you to step away from the lady, Detective Santos announced, approaching our booth with her badge clearly visible. Detective Maria Santos, Cedar Rapids Police Department. Derek's face went from pale to gray as he realized he'd just committed assault in front of a police officer while attempting to steal documents that proved his months-long fraud conspiracy. Derek Hartwell and Sienna Hartwell, you're under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy, Detective Santos announced, as Detective Walsh appeared beside her with handcuffs. As Derek and Sienna were led away in handcuffs through the dining room of Murphy's Steakhouse with every customer and staff member watching in stunned silence, I felt a profound sense of closure. Harold's hidden fortune had remained hidden. Derek's crimes were finally exposed, and the confused elderly woman he'd tried to manipulate had proven to be far more capable than he'd ever imagined. The arrest at Murphy's Steakhouse was only the beginning of Derek and Sienna's complete downfall. By morning, their mugshots were featured prominently in the Cedar Rapids Gazette under the headline, "Local Businessman Arrested for Elder Abuse Conspiracy." The accompanying article detailed the sophisticated fraud scheme and included quotes from Detective Santos about the calculated nature of the financial crimes. Derek's construction business, Riverside Custom Homes, collapsed within hours of his arrest. 3 pending contracts were immediately canceled when clients learned about the fraud charges. 2 suppliers who'd been waiting months for payment filed liens against Derek's equipment, and the Better Business Bureau suspended his business license pending investigation of customer complaints. Sienna lost her position as a dental hygienist at Smile Bright Dental Care the same day her arrest became public. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the practice owner, issued a statement saying they couldn't employ someone facing charges for elderly exploitation and financial fraud. Sienna's professional license was suspended pending the outcome of criminal proceedings. The legal consequences unfolded with devastating speed. Derek was charged with 5 felonies: elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, and forgery. Each charge carried potential sentences of 3 to 8 years in prison. Sienna faced 4 felonies as a co-conspirator in the scheme. Dr. Coleman's involvement brought additional scrutiny to her practice. The Iowa Board of Medicine launched an investigation into her patient evaluations, discovering that she'd falsified assessments for at least 12 families over the past decade. Her medical license was immediately suspended, and she faced criminal charges for medical fraud and conspiracy. This case represents one of the most elaborate elder abuse schemes we've encountered, District Attorney Michael Thompson announced at a press conference. The defendants systematically undermined the victim's reputation, forged legal documents, and conspired to steal what they believed was her entire inheritance. The financial destruction extended far beyond criminal charges. Derek and Sienna's house in West Des Moines went into immediate foreclosure when Derek's arrest triggered acceleration clauses in both mortgages. The bank seized the property within 30 days, leaving them homeless and owing over $200,000 in deficiency judgments. Their 7 credit cards were canceled when the companies learned about the fraud charges, but the $90,000 in debt remained. With no income and no assets, Derek and Sienna faced immediate bankruptcy and wage garnishment for any future earnings. Derek's truck and Sienna's luxury sedan were repossessed to satisfy outstanding loans. Their furniture and personal belongings were sold at auction to pay creditors, generating less than $8,000 toward debts exceeding $300,000. The social destruction was equally complete. Derek's arrest became the subject of intense gossip throughout Cedar Rapids and West Des Moines. Parents at Sienna's children's school whispered about the woman who'd tried to steal from her elderly mother-in-law. Former clients of Derek's business shared stories about shoddy workmanship and suspected overcharges. Derek's former friends and business associates distanced themselves immediately. Robert Rodriguez, the family friend who'd attended the dinner, gave an interview to the Gazette expressing shock and betrayal. "I thought I was helping a concerned son protect his mother. Instead, I was witnessing an attempted theft that would have left Allegra homeless and destitute. Elizabeth Henderson, my longtime neighbor, publicly apologized for believing Derek's lies about my mental condition. Derek convinced me that Allegra was showing signs of dementia, she told reporters. He was so convincing, so concerned. I feel terrible for doubting someone I've known and respected for 15 years. The extended family rallied around me with genuine support for the first time in months. My sister Janet flew in from Phoenix crying with relief that Derek's claims about my mental deterioration had been lies. My brother Carl called from Seattle to apologize for initially believing Derek's stories about my confusion and need for family intervention. Allegra, I should have known you were too sharp to suddenly develop dementia, Carl admitted during our emotional phone conversation. Derek played on our fears about aging and made us doubt someone we've known our whole lives. The community response was overwhelmingly supportive. My former colleagues at Lincoln Elementary School organized a dinner to celebrate my victory over family exploitation. Local newspapers praised my courage in standing up to manipulation and fraud. Bethel Methodist Church, where Derek had spread rumors about my mental decline, invited me to speak about elder abuse prevention. Pastor Williams apologized for initially believing Derek's concerns were genuine rather than recognizing them as reputation manipulation. Mrs. Hartwell's experience reminds us that elder abuse often comes from within families, Pastor Williams said during his sermon the following Sunday. We must be vigilant about protecting our senior members from those who would exploit their trust. The legal proceedings moved forward with inexorable momentum. Derek's court-appointed attorney attempted to negotiate a plea bargain, but District Attorney Thompson insisted on significant prison time given the severity and premeditation of the crimes. Mr. Hartwell spent months planning to defraud his elderly mother, Thompson stated during plea negotiations. He forged documents, manipulated medical evaluations, and conspired to have her declared incompetent for financial gain. This level of calculated abuse demands substantial consequences. Derek ultimately accepted a plea agreement requiring him to serve 8 years in the Iowa State Penitentiary, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. He was also ordered to pay full restitution, though his bankruptcy made actual repayment impossible. Sienna received a slightly lesser sentence of 5 years in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. Her cooperation with investigators regarding Dr. Coleman's fraud network resulted in a reduced sentence, but she still faced the loss of her professional license and permanent criminal record. Dr. Coleman faced the most severe consequences of all. Her falsification of medical evaluations constituted both criminal fraud and professional malpractice. She was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison and ordered to pay damages to families affected by her fraudulent assessments. The Iowa Board of Medicine permanently revoked Dr. Coleman's license and published a detailed report about her scheme warning other states about physicians who might be falsifying geriatric evaluations for financial gain. Meanwhile, Harold's true estate became public knowledge during the court proceedings. Local newspapers reported extensively about the hidden millionaire accountant who'd accumulated a fortune through agricultural investments while living modestly in Cedar Rapids. Harold Hartwell was a financial genius who disguised his success to protect his family from the complications that often accompany sudden wealth. Mr. Steinberg explained to reporters, his careful planning ensured that his wife would be provided for while being protected from exactly the kind of exploitation she ultimately faced. The lakefront estate in Minnesota and the vineyard in California became symbols of Harold's foresight and Derek's spectacular miscalculation. Derek had planned to steal what he thought was $300,000 and instead had lost his freedom while trying to defraud a woman worth nearly $30 million. Financial experts praised Harold's investment strategy and estate planning. Agricultural economics professor Dr. Amanda Foster from Iowa State University called Harold's portfolio a masterclass in long-term agricultural investment and risk management. Mr. Hartwell identified trends in farmland values and crop futures decades before they became widely recognized. Dr. Foster explained in a Gazette interview, his success demonstrates the potential for patient-informed investment in agricultural markets. As Derek and Sienna began serving their prison sentences, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been served, but the cost included losing the son I'd raised and watching him destroy his own life through greed and manipulation. The community had learned valuable lessons about elder abuse medical fraud and the importance of questioning claims about cognitive decline in aging adults. Derek and Sienna's spectacular downfall served as a cautionary tale about the consequences of exploiting family trust for financial gain. But for me, the most important outcome was reclaiming my independence and dignity after months of being portrayed as a confused, helpless victim. Derek had underestimated my intelligence, manipulated my reputation, and planned to steal my future. Instead, his elaborate scheme had revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed and connected me with resources that would shape the next chapter of my life in ways Derek never could have imagined. 2 years after Derek and Sienna's conviction, I stood on the wraparound porch of my lakefront estate in Brainerd, Minnesota, watching the morning sun paint golden streaks across the crystal-clear water. The house that Harold had secretly purchased 20 years earlier had become my sanctuary, a place where I could heal from the betrayal and build a future based on my own choices rather than someone else's manipulation. The transition from Cedar Rapids to Minnesota had been surprisingly smooth. After Derek's trial concluded, I sold our modest ranch house and used the proceeds to establish a foundation focused on preventing elder abuse and supporting victims of family financial exploitation. The Hartwell Foundation for Elder Protection became my primary passion, operating from offices in both Minnesota and Iowa. We provided legal assistance to elderly adults facing family manipulation, funded research into elder abuse prevention, and supported legislation strengthening protections for aging Americans. My first major initiative was establishing a network of independent geriatric assessments to counter fraudulent evaluations like Dr. Coleman's. Working with legitimate medical professionals, we created protocols for identifying biased or manipulated cognitive testing. Mrs. Hartwell's experience demonstrated how easily medical evaluations can be corrupted for financial purposes, explained Dr. Sarah Chen, who became the Foundation's chief medical advisor. Our protocols ensure that elderly adults receive genuinely objective assessments of their capabilities. The vineyard in Sonoma County provided another avenue for meaningful engagement. Rather than selling Harold's California investment, I decided to learn the wine business from the ground up. I hired experienced vineyard manager Carlos Mendez and spent months studying grape cultivation, fermentation processes, and wine marketing. Hartwell Estate Wines became a boutique operation focused on sustainable farming and premium quality. Our first vintage received recognition from Wine Spectator magazine, validating Harold's investment instincts and my decision to honor his vision. Harold would be amazed to see what you've accomplished with his investments, Mr. Steinberg observed during one of his visits to Minnesota. He protected your future, but you've created something that will impact generations. My relationship with extended family gradually healed as the truth about Derek's manipulation became clear. Janet moved to Minnesota to help manage the foundation, bringing her organizational skills and genuine concern for elder abuse prevention. Carl visited regularly from Seattle, often bringing his grandchildren to experience the lake house during summer vacations. Our renewed closeness helped fill the void left by Derek's absence, though the pain of his betrayal never completely disappeared. I keep thinking about all the signs we missed. Carl reflected during one of our evening conversations on the porch. Derek had been manipulative since childhood, but we attributed it to ambition rather than recognizing it as a character flaw. The community in Brainerd embraced me with warmth and respect that contrasted sharply with the pity and concern I'd faced in Cedar Rapids during Derek's campaign. My neighbors knew me as the foundation president and successful vintner rather than the confused widow Derek had portrayed. I joined the Brainerd Historical Society, became active in local environmental protection efforts, and developed friendships based on shared interests rather than geographical proximity or family connections. Margaret Foster Harold's former colleague from Midwest Agricultural Solutions became one of my closest advisors on investment strategy. She helped me understand Harold's methods and continue growing the estate according to his principles. Harold always said that wealth should serve purpose beyond personal comfort, Margaret explained during our monthly financial reviews. Your foundation work and community involvement represent exactly the kind of legacy he hoped to create. The foundation's impact expanded beyond my initial expectations. We'd assisted over 200 elderly adults facing family exploitation-funded research at 6 universities and supported legislation in 12 states, strengthening elder abuse protections. Our most significant achievement was creating a national database of medical professionals who specialized in objective geriatric assessment, countering the network of corrupt evaluators like Dr. Coleman, who'd been exploiting families for decades. The Hartwell Foundation has become a model for elder protection advocacy, noted Senator Patricia Williams during congressional hearings on elder abuse prevention. Mrs. Hartwell's experience transformed personal trauma into national reform. My speaking engagements took me across the country sharing lessons about recognizing manipulation, protecting assets, and maintaining independence while aging. The response was consistently powerful, with audience members recognizing their own experiences in Derek's manipulation tactics. Family exploitation often begins with seemingly caring concern. I explained during a presentation to the American Association of Retired Persons. The key is distinguishing genuine support from controlling behavior disguised as protection. The vineyard continued flourishing under Carlos's management and my growing expertise. We'd expanded production to include 3 varietals and developed distribution relationships with restaurants throughout California and Minnesota. Wine industry publications praised our sustainable farming practices and community involvement. Hartwell Estate Wines became known for quality products and ethical business practices, generating profits that supported foundation activities. 5 years after Harold's death, I received an unexpected visit from Derek's former attorney. Derek had been serving his sentence at the Iowa State Penitentiary and wanted to communicate with me through legal channels. The letter Derek's attorney delivered contained an apology that seemed genuine, though I couldn't determine whether it represented authentic remorse or continued manipulation. Derek acknowledged the harm he'd caused and expressed understanding that rebuilding our relationship might be impossible. I realize that you probably can't forgive me, Derek wrote. I spent months planning to steal from you and destroy your independence. I convinced myself that I was protecting you, but I was really protecting my own financial interests. Derek's letter also revealed that prison had provided opportunities for education and reflection. He'd completed a bachelor's degree in social work and planned to focus on helping other inmates prepare for reintegration after release. Maybe I can prevent other people from making the mistakes I made, Derek concluded. I can't undo the damage I caused, but I can try to ensure that my experience serves some positive purpose. I chose not to respond to Derek's letter, immediately needing time to process the complex emotions his words evoked. The foundation work had taught me about forgiveness as a component of healing, but I wasn't ready to determine whether Derek's rehabilitation was genuine or strategic. Sienna had been released after serving 3.5 years of her sentence, relocating to another state to rebuild her life away from the scandal's impact. She'd lost custody of her children during the legal proceedings, and her professional licenses remained permanently revoked. Dr. Coleman was serving her federal sentence and would face additional state charges upon release. Her medical fraud network had been completely dismantled, protecting future elderly adults from manipulated evaluations. As I reflected on the journey from Harold's death to my current life, I recognized how Derek's betrayal had ultimately strengthened me in unexpected ways. His manipulation had forced me to develop resources and capabilities I'd never known I possessed. "You've become the person Harold always knew you could be," Janet observed during one of our foundation planning meetings. "He protected your future, but you created your own destiny." The most profound lesson I'd learned was about the difference between genuine care and controlling manipulation. Derek's concern for my welfare had been entirely about serving his own interests, while the support I received from professionals and new friends focused on enhancing my independence rather than limiting it. True love and respect support autonomy rather than demanding control. Family relationships should empower rather than diminish, and aging should bring wisdom and freedom rather than dependency and exploitation. Harold's hidden fortune had protected me from Derek's immediate theft, but the experience of defending myself had revealed strengths that no amount of money could provide. I'd learned to trust my own judgment, advocate for my interests, and build a life based on purpose rather than survival. Standing on my porch as another Minnesota sunset painted the lake in shades of amber and rose, I felt grateful for both Harold's protection and my own resilience. Derek's betrayal had been devastating, but surviving it had taught me that true security comes from inner strength rather than external circumstances. The foundation would continue its work, the vineyard would produce its award-winning wines, and I would continue building a legacy worthy of Harold's memory and my own values. Derek had tried to steal my future, but instead, he'd helped me discover a strength and purpose that no one could ever take away. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where someone you trusted was working against your best interests? Family relationships can be complicated, and it's not always easy to recognize when love becomes manipulation or when protection becomes control. I'd love to hear your thoughts about setting boundaries with family members and recognizing the difference between genuine care and hidden agendas. If my story resonated with you, or if you found these lessons about protecting yourself and standing up for your rights helpful, please like this video and share it with others who might benefit from hearing about the importance of trusting your instincts and seeking help when something feels wrong. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming challenges and finding strength in unexpected places. Thank you for listening to my journey from victim to victor, and I wish you the courage to stand up for yourself and the wisdom to recognize your own worth, no matter what age or stage of life you're experiencing.